Veltar's scales shifted from calm blue to worried yellow as he stared at the sensor readings. The crystalline patches on his neck flickered with nervous energy. In his 40 years serving the Nexian Coalition, he had never seen ships like these. The bridge of the Harmony's edge buzzed with quiet activity. Coalition officers from 7 different species worked together as they always had. The bird-like Etherans chirped softly to each other. The tall, thin Vortani moved with their usual grace. Everything seemed normal, but Veltar felt something was different. "Unknown vessels detected at Grid 77 Alpha," announced the sensor. Officer, a young Nexian named Kolth. His scales were bright orange with excitement. They appeared to be approaching Coalition space. Admiral Zethra, a wise old Vortani with silver skin, leaned forward in her command chair. Her large black eyes studied the main display. "How many ships, officer?" 47 vessels of various sizes, Kolth replied. "Their design is unlike anything in our database. Energy signatures are primitive but functional." Veltar moved closer to the sensor station. The ships on the screen looked rough and ugly compared to Coalition vessels. They were covered in armor plating and strange projections that served no obvious purpose. Most Coalition ships were smooth and elegant, built for efficiency and beauty. These ships looked like they were built only to fight. "Begin standard first contact protocols," Admiral Zethra ordered. "Send the universal greeting on all frequencies." The communications officer, a small glyphid named Trillax, worked at his station with 4 arms moving in perfect harmony. His insect-like features showed concentration as he opened the channel. Minutes passed. The alien fleet continued its steady approach toward Coalition space. Then, suddenly, a response came through. "This is Captain Taemin of the Earth vessel Soul's Pride. We receive your transmission. We come in peace but request urgent passage through your space." The voice was strange. It had a flat, controlled tone that was different from how most species spoke when making first contact. Usually there was excitement or fear or curiosity. This human sounded like he was ordering supplies. Admiral Zethra gestured for the main screen to display the transmission. The face that appeared made Veltar's scales ripple with surprise. The creature was mostly hairless, except for the top of its head. Its skin was smooth and pale. 2 small eyes looked directly at the camera without blinking much. "I am Admiral Zethra of the Nexian Coalition," the Admiral replied. "We welcome you to our space, Captain Taemin. May we ask what brings your people so far from your home?" The human's expression did not change. "We are pursuing hostiles who destroyed one of our civilian ships. 50,000 of our people were killed. The hostiles have taken position in the Keth system, which our charts show is in neutral space beyond your territory." Veltar noticed something odd. When the human mentioned 50,000 deaths, his voice stayed exactly the same. Most species would show some emotion when discussing such a terrible loss. Their voices would shake or grow angry or sad. But this Taemin spoke about mass death like he was reading a supply report. 50,000, Admiral Zethra repeated softly. Her own voice showed the proper sadness. "We are sorry for your loss. Which species attacked your people?" "They call themselves the Drakmor Empire," Taemin replied. "Our intelligence suggests they are known to you." A chill went through the bridge. Every officer knew about the Drakmor. They were the most feared military force in this part of the galaxy. The Coalition had been trying to make peace with them for 30 years. The Drakmor were warriors who lived for battle. They had never been defeated in open combat. Captain Tae-min, Admiral Zethra said carefully, the Drakmor are extremely dangerous. They have superior weapons and vast experience in warfare. Perhaps we can help you find a diplomatic solution. The human was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Veltar's scales turn bright yellow with alarm. Thank you for the warning. We appreciate diplomatic solutions, but diplomacy works best when both sides understand the cost of choosing war. We intend to make sure the Drakmor understand that cost very clearly. There was something in the way he said cost that was wrong. It sounded like he was talking about a price that someone would have to pay, not the Drakmor, someone else. How many ships do you have? Asked Commander Veltar, speaking for the first time. Tae-min looked directly at him. Enough. What type of weapons do you carry? Effective ones. Admiral Zethra tried a different approach. Captain, we have detailed information about Drakmor. Military capabilities. They have over 200 warships in that system. Your 47 ships, no matter how brave your crews, will not be sufficient. The human smiled. It was not a happy expression. Admiral, you seem to think this is about ship counts. It's not about how many ships we have. It's about how many ships we're willing to lose to complete our mission. That sentence hung in the air like a poison cloud. Veltar had fought in 17 conflicts during his career. He had seen desperate last stands and heroic sacrifices, but he had never heard anyone talk about losing ships like it was part of the plan. We formally request passage through Coalition space, Tae-min continued. We will respect all territorial boundaries and cause no damage to Coalition property. We expect to reach the Keth system in 72 hours. And if we refuse passage? Admiral Zethra asked. Then we will go around your space. It will take us 6 additional days. The Drakmor will have more time to prepare their defenses. More of our people will die taking those defenses down, but we will still complete our mission. The certainty in his voice was absolute. This was not a threat or a bluff. The human was simply stating facts, like saying that water was wet or that stars were hot. Admiral Zethra looked around the bridge. Every officer was staring at the screen with expressions of confusion and growing unease. These humans were unlike any species they had encountered. Very well, the Admiral decided. We grant you passage through Coalition space. We also offer humanitarian aid and medical support after your engagement with the Drakmor. That's kind. Of you, Tae-min replied. But we won't need medical support afterward. Surely there will be casualties, Commander Veltar said. Even in victory, some of your people will be wounded. The human looked at him with those steady, unblinking eyes. Commander, I think you misunderstand our situation. We're not going to fight the Drakmor and then come back to tell you about it. We're going to solve the Drakmor problem. Permanently. Some problems require permanent solutions. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in complete silence. Veltar stared at the empty screen, his scales now a deep purple color that meant fear mixed with confusion. In all his years of military service, he had never met warriors who spoke about war like it was maintenance work. The humans talked about death and destruction like other species talked about repairing equipment. And somehow, that was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. 3 days later, Veltar found himself aboard the human flagship Incheon's Wrath. Coalition Command had ordered him to serve as a military observer. His mission was simple: watch the humans fight the Drakmor, then help with rescue operations. After the humans were defeated, the inside of the human ship was nothing like Coalition vessels. Everything was gray metal and harsh lighting. There were no decorative elements, no art, no comfortable spaces for relaxation. The corridors were narrow and filled with pipes and cables. It looked more like a factory than a warship. Veltar's escort was a young human named Lieutenant Bo Ram. She was small and thin, with dark hair tied back in a simple knot. Her uniform was plain and practical. She walked quickly through the ship's passages, her boots making sharp sounds on the metal floor. "Your first time on a human ship?" Boram asked as they walked. "Yes," Veltar replied. His scales shifted to polite green. "It's very different from our vessels. Our ships are built for fighting, not for comfort," Boram said. "Every space has a purpose. Every system has a backup. We don't waste room on things that don't help us complete our missions." They passed groups of human crew members working on various tasks. Veltar noticed that they all moved with the same efficient purpose. No one was talking about personal matters or joking around. They worked quietly, checking systems and preparing equipment. "Your crew seems very focused," Veltar observed. "We'll be in combat soon," Boram replied. "Everyone knows their job. Everyone does their job. That's how we survive." They reached the bridge, and Veltar met Admiral Sora for the first time. She was older than Captain Taymin, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes. She stood in the center of the bridge, watching displays that showed the positions of both fleets. "Commander Veltar," Admiral Sora said without looking away from the displays. "Welcome aboard. I hope your stay with us is educational." "Thank you for allowing me to observe," Veltar replied. "When do you expect the battle to begin?" "In 18 hours, Sora answered. "The Drakmor have established defensive positions around the third planet. They're waiting for us to come to them." Veltar studied the tactical display. The Drakmor had over 200 ships arranged in a strong defensive formation. They controlled the high ground around the planet and had plenty of time to prepare their weapons and shields. "That's a very strong position," Veltar said. "Coalition doctrine would suggest finding a way to draw them out into open space." "Admiral," Sora finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm and steady like still water. "We're not going to draw them out. We're going straight through their defenses." "But that will cost you many ships," Veltar said. "Many lives." "Yes, it will," Sora agreed. "But it will cost them more. And when it's over, they won't be in a position to threaten civilian ships ever again." Veltar met the other key officers over the next few hours. Tactical Officer Dongwu was a quiet man who spoke in numbers and percentages. He showed Veltar attack patterns and casualty projections like he was explaining a math problem. "We estimate we'll lose 30 to 40% of our fleet in the initial assault," Dongwu said, pointing to red sections on his display. "Acceptable losses for the mission objectives." Communications specialist Hyojin was monitoring Drakmor transmissions. She had learned their language and was listening to their battle preparations. "They're confident," she reported to Admiral Sora. "Their commanders are joking about how quickly they'll destroy us. They think we're another soft coalition species." "Good," Sora replied. "Overconfidence makes them predictable." As the hours passed, Veltar watched the humans prepare for battle. He had observed many species getting ready for combat. Usually there was excitement or fear or anger. Warriors would perform rituals or sing songs or make speeches about glory and honor. The humans did none of these things. They simply checked their weapons and systems with calm efficiency. They went over their battle plans like they were reviewing maintenance schedules. They spoke about dying in combat the same way other species talked about working late shifts. Captain J1 commanded the ship's marine detachment. He was a big man with scars on his hands and a voice that never got louder than necessary. Veltar watched him brief his troops about boarding operations. "Some of you won't be coming back," J1 told his Marines. "That's the job. Your sacrifice will save lives back home. Make it count." The Marines nodded like he had told them what time dinner would be served. Veltar found this reaction disturbing. "Don't your people fear death?" he asked Boram. "Of course. We do," she replied. "But fear doesn't change what needs to be done. The Drakmor killed 50,000 civilians. Someone has to make sure they never do it again. If that someone is us, then that's us." "But why does it have to be you?" Veltar pressed. "There are other ways to handle conflicts: negotiations, sanctions, diplomatic pressure." Boram stopped, walking, and looked at him directly. "Commander, how long has the coalition been trying to negotiate with the Drakmor?" "About 30 years, Veltar admitted. "And how many civilian ships have they attacked in that time?" Veltar was quiet. The answer was 17 ships. Thousands of innocent people killed while the coalition tried to find peaceful solutions. "That's why it has to be us," Boram said. "We don't negotiate with killers. We stop them." The hours passed, slowly. Veltar watched the human crew go about their duties with mechanical precision. They ate simple meals at their stations. They checked and double-checked their equipment. They reviewed their orders and confirmed their assignments. What bothered Veltar most was how normal it all seemed to them. For the coalition species, war was a last resort, a terrible thing that happened when all else failed. For humans, war appeared to be just another job that needed to be done. 6 hours before the battle, Admiral Sora called a final briefing for all department heads. Veltar was invited to observe. The meeting took place in a small room with a large display screen and plain metal chairs. "Final positions are confirmed," Dongwu reported. "Drakmor fleet is holding defensive formation. They have not moved to intercept us." "Enemy communications?" Sora asked. "They're still confident," Hyojin said. "Their admiral is promising his fleet an easy victory. He says human ships are probably as weak as coalition vessels." Several human officers smiled at this. Not happy smiles, but cold expressions that made Veltar's scales turn yellow. "Marine readiness?" Sora asked. "All boarding teams are prepared," Captain J1 replied. "We have detailed plans for taking control of Drakmor command ships. Priority targets are marked for capture rather than destruction." "Engineering status?" "All systems are operating at maximum efficiency," reported Chief Engineer Nari. "Damage control teams are standing by. Emergency repairs can be completed in combat conditions." Admiral Sora nodded. "Any questions or concerns?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then Captain J1 spoke. "Admiral, the coalition observer seems troubled by our methods. Should we explain our reasoning to him?" Sora looked at Veltar. "Commander, do you have questions about what you've observed?" Veltar's scales shifted to deep blue, the color of serious thought. "I'm trying to understand how your people can be so calm about what's coming. Tomorrow, many of you will die. Your ships will be destroyed. Your friends will be killed. Yet you discuss it like routine business." Admiral Sora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Commander, we're not calm because we don't care about death. We're calm because we've already accepted it as the price of doing what's right. The Drakmor made a choice when they killed our civilians. Now we're going to show them what happens when you make that choice." She stood up and looked around the room at her officers. "The Drakmor think war is about glory and conquest. They think it's about proving who's stronger. They're wrong. War is about solving problems that can't be solved any other way. Tomorrow, we solve the Drakmor problem permanently. The meeting ended, and Veltar returned to his guest quarters. He sat on the narrow bunk and stared at the metal walls, trying to understand what he had witnessed. These humans were unlike any species he had ever encountered. They approached war like engineers approaching a difficult construction project. They calculated costs and benefits. They planned for acceptable losses. They prepared for their own deaths with the same care they used to maintain their equipment. And somehow, that made them more frightening than any berserker warrior or bloodthirsty predator he had ever faced. The battle began at exactly 0600 ship time. Veltar stood on the bridge of Inchen's Wrath, watching the tactical displays as the human fleet approached the Drakmor defensive positions. His scales were bright yellow with anxiety. Admiral Sora stood calmly in the center of the bridge, her hands folded behind her back. Around her, human officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. There was no excitement, no battle cries, no dramatic speeches. The humans went to war like they were starting a regular workday. "All ships report ready," Communications Officer Hyojin announced. "Drakmor fleet is maintaining defensive formation," added Tactical Officer Dongwu. "They're waiting for us to enter their firing range." Admiral Sora nodded. "Begin attack. Pattern Alpha. All ships, execute on my mark." Veltar watched the display as the human fleet split into multiple groups. This was not the careful, methodical approach he expected. Instead of forming protective formations or trying to minimize losses, the humans were spreading out to attack from different directions at the same time. "Mark," Admiral Sora said quietly. The human fleet accelerated toward the Drakmor positions. Veltar expected them to slow down as they approached enemy weapons range, but they kept getting faster. The ships were not trying to avoid the coming battle. They were rushing toward it. The first exchange of fire lit up space with energy beams and explosions. Veltar watched in horror as human ships took direct hits and kept flying. Their shields failed. Their armor was burned away, but they continued their attack runs. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported a damage control officer. His voice was calm, despite the fact that part of his own ship had just been blown apart. "Seal the breach and continue operations," Admiral Sora replied. On the tactical display, Veltar saw something that made his scales turn white with shock. A human destroyer called Busan's Hammer was heavily damaged and falling behind the main attack. Instead of retreating to safety, the ship suddenly accelerated directly toward a Drakmor cruiser. "What is Commander Hyunwoo doing?" Veltar asked. "His engines are failing," Dongwu explained without emotion. "He's using his ship as a weapon." Veltar watched as the destroyer crashed into the much larger Drakmor cruiser. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from across the system. 800 human crew members had just died, and the bridge officers were already moving on to the next tactical problem. "Gap created in enemy line 7, Dongwu reported. "Frigate squadron moving to exploit." This was not how civilized species fought wars. The coalition military doctrine emphasized preserving life and minimizing casualties. Ships that were damaged retreated for repairs. Crews that were outnumbered looked for ways to escape and fight another day. The humans did the opposite. When their ships were damaged, they looked for ways to use the damage as a weapon. When they were outnumbered, they attacked even more aggressively. "Fighter Squadron Delta is engaging enemy destroyers," Hyojin reported. On the screen, Veltar watched a group of human fighter craft attack a formation of much larger Drakmor ships. The fighters were tiny compared to the destroyers, like insects attacking giant predators. But these insects had a plan. Pilot Kyung-ho led his squadron in a coordinated attack that Veltar would later describe as controlled suicide. Half the Yai fighters flew directly at the enemy guns, drawing fire and dying in brilliant explosions. While the Drakmor weapons were busy destroying the first wave, the remaining fighters slipped through the defenses and struck at vital systems. Squadron Delta has disabled 3 enemy destroyers, Dongwu announced. Casualty report, 12 fighters lost, 6 survivors. Kyung-ho's voice came through the communication system, steady and professional despite having just watched half his pilots die. Gap is confirmed open. Bomber Squadron, you are clear for your attack run. The next wave of human ships flew through the opening that had been bought with the lives of 12 fighter pilots. They attacked the disabled destroyers, with surgical precision turning the Drakmor ships into floating wreckage. This pattern repeated across the entire battlefield. Human crews sacrificed themselves to create opportunities for other human crews to exploit. Each death served a purpose in the larger battle plan. Nothing was wasted, not even the destruction of their own ships. Marine boarding parties are away, Captain J1 reported from his position near the transport bays. Veltar watched through helmet cameras as human Marines crossed the empty space between ships. They flew through clouds of debris and energy fire, heading for disabled Drakmor vessels. Many of the transport craft were hit and destroyed before reaching their targets, but the survivors pressed on. Sergeant Yoon-ji led one of the boarding parties. Veltar watched her helmet camera feed as she and her squad cut through the hull of a Drakmor cruiser. Inside the enemy ship, they moved through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. The Drakmor defenders were waiting for them. These were experienced warriors who had fought dozens of battles against different species. They knew how to repel boarders and protect their ships, but they had never faced humans before. Yoonji's squad advanced through the ship like a machine designed for killing. When they encountered resistance, they didn't try to negotiate or find alternative routes. They simply eliminated the resistance and continued forward. Corporal Sung Min took a plasma bolt to the chest during one firefight. Instead of calling for medical help or falling back, he used his final moments to arm a grenade and throw it into the Drakmor position. The explosion killed him and 6 enemy soldiers. Section 4 secured, Yoonji reported, moving to primary target. Her voice showed no emotion about losing one of her soldiers. The mission was more important than any individual life, including her own. Across the battlefield, the tide was turning. The Drakmor had started the fight with superior numbers and defensive positions. They were famous throughout the galaxy as the most dangerous military force anyone had ever faced. But they were not prepared for an enemy that treated death as a tool to be used when necessary. Human ships continued to ram enemy vessels when their weapons failed. Human crews continued to fight even when their ships were falling apart around them. Human Marines continued to advance even when they were outnumbered and outgunned. Enemy flagship is signaling retreat, Hyo-jin announced. Veltar looked at the tactical display. The Drakmor fleet, which had started with over 200 ships, was down to less than 50 functional vessels. The humans had lost nearly half their own fleet, but the survivors were still fighting with the same cold efficiency they had shown at the beginning. "Pursue and engage," Admiral Sora ordered. "Admiral," Veltar said, his voice high with stress. "They're trying to withdraw. Surely you can let them go. The battle is won." Admiral Sora turned to look at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard as steel. Commander, this is not about winning a battle. This is about solving a problem. The problem is that the Drakmor think they can attack civilian ships and face no serious consequences. If we let them retreat today, they'll attack more civilians. Tomorrow. But they're beaten, Veltar protested. They know your ships are dangerous now. They won't want to fight you again. Want has nothing to do with it, Sora replied. We're going to make sure they can't fight anyone again. Ever. The human fleet chased the retreating Drakmor ships across the system. It was not a pursuit. It was a hunt. The humans tracked down every enemy vessel and either captured it or destroyed it completely. By the end of the day, the most feared military force in the galaxy had been reduced to a handful of damaged ships limping toward home. The space around. The third planet was filled with wreckage from both fleets. Veltar stood on the bridge, looking at the aftermath of the battle. His scales were deep purple, the color of fear and confusion mixed together. He had watched hundreds of human ships destroyed and thousands of human lives lost, but the humans around him were not mourning their dead or celebrating their victory. They were already working on damage reports and casualty lists. They treated the end of the battle like the end of any other workday. Total casualties? Admiral Sora asked. 41 ships lost. 18,000 personnel killed in action, Dongwu reported. 18,000 people. Dead, gone forever, and the Admiral just nodded like she had been told the weather forecast. Drakmor losses? She asked. 197 ships destroyed or captured. Estimated enemy casualties exceed 50,000. Veltar realized that the humans had not just won a battle. They had destroyed an entire fleet. The Drakmor military power had been broken in a single day by an enemy they had never taken seriously. Mission. Status, Sora asked. Complete, Captain Jawan reported. All objectives achieved. The Drakmor are no longer capable of threatening civilian shipping. Admiral Sora finally allowed herself a small smile. Not a happy expression, but the satisfied look of someone who had finished a difficult job. Signal the Coalition fleet, she ordered. Tell them the Drakmor problem has been solved. Veltar looked at the display one more time. The wreckage of 2 fleets floated in the darkness of space. Thousands of beings were dead. A military empire that had dominated this region for centuries had been destroyed in a single day, and the humans were already planning their next mission. The battle was over, but Veltar soon learned that humans had a different definition of over than the rest of the galaxy. 6 hours after the last Drakmor ship had been destroyed or captured, Admiral Sora was still giving orders. The human fleet had not begun to withdraw. Instead, they were spreading out across the system, searching for something. What are your ships looking for? Veltar asked. His scales were still purple with confusion and stress. Survivors, Admiral, Sora replied. And evidence. Evidence of what? War crimes, civilian casualties, other attacks we don't know about yet. Tactical Officer Dongwu approached with a data pad. Admiral, we've found something you need to see. The captured Drakmor flagship has extensive records in their database. Admiral Sora took the pad and read through the information. Her expression grew colder with each line. When she finished, she handed the pad to Veltar. Look at this, she said. The datapad showed a list of ships and dates. Veltar recognized some of the names. These were civilian vessels from various coalition species that had gone missing over the past 10 years. Ships that had simply vanished without a trace. The Drakmor kept records of their attacks, Sora explained. Not just military targets, civilian transports, refugee ships, medical vessels, They've been hunting non-combatants for sport. Veltar's scales turned white. The list showed over 100 ships, hundreds of thousands of innocent beings killed, and no one had known who was responsible. "This changes everything," he whispered. "Yes, it does," Sora agreed. "Captain J1, prepare boarding teams for all captured Drakmor vessels. I want complete data downloads from every ship, every record, every log entry, every piece of evidence." Captain J1 nodded. "Already in progress, Admiral. Marine Tech Specialist Wanshik is leading the data recovery teams. They've found extensive files on at least 30 more incidents." Veltar watched through security cameras as human Marines moved through the captured Drakmor ships. They were not looting or celebrating their victory. Instead, they were carefully collecting every piece of information they could find. Wanshik worked alongside engineer Nari to access the Drakmor computer systems. They moved through the alien ship with scientific precision, copying files and cataloging evidence like investigators at a crime scene. "These aren't just military records," Wanshik reported over the communication system. "They kept detailed logs of civilian casualties. They tracked how much terror each attack caused. They were using fear as a weapon." Admiral Sora's jaw tightened. "Continue the downloads. I want everything." 3 hours later, the human fleet received an unexpected visitor. A single Drakmor ship approached under a flag of truce. It was a small vessel moving slowly and broadcasting surrender codes on all frequencies. "Drakmor messenger ship requesting permission to approach," Hyojin announced. "Grant permission," Admiral Sora ordered, "but maintain full weapons lock." The ship docked with Inchun's Wrath, and a single Drakmor officer came aboard. Veltar had never seen a member of this species up close before. The creature was tall and muscular, covered in thick scales that looked like natural armor. Its eyes were yellow and predatory, set in a face designed for intimidation. But this Drakmor did not look intimidating. It looked terrified. The creature identified itself as Commander Kethvor, speaking for Overlord Kethmor, the surviving leader of the Drakmor Empire. Its voice shook as it spoke. "The Overlord wishes to negotiate terms of surrender," Kethvor said. Admiral Sora studied the alien creature. "What terms did your Overlord have in mind?" "We offer to withdraw from all disputed territories. We will pay compensation for damages. We will sign non-aggression treaties with all coalition species." "And in return," Sora asked, "you allow our surviving ships to return home. You do not pursue our forces beyond this system. You accept our surrender with honor." Admiral Sora was quiet for a long moment. Then she gestured to Captain J1, who handed her one of the data pads they had recovered from the Drakmor ships. "Commander Kethvor," she said, "before we discuss terms, I want you to look at something." She showed him the pad. On the screen was a detailed log entry from a Drakmor attack on a coalition medical ship. The entry described how the Drakmor had disabled the vessel, then slowly killed the patients and medical staff while recording their suffering. Kethvor's eyes widened. "Where did you get this?" "From your own ships," Sora replied. "We found records of over 100 similar attacks, refugee ships, hospital vessels, civilian transports. Your people weren't just fighting wars. You were murdering innocents for entertainment." The Drakmor commander looked around the room nervously. "These are isolated incidents. Individual commanders acting without orders." "No," Captain J1 said firmly. He produced another data pad. "These orders came directly from your overlord. Every attack was planned and approved at the highest levels. This was official policy." Kethvor's shoulders sagged. "What do you want?" Admiral Sora stood up and walked over to the alien. Despite being much smaller, she somehow seemed to tower over the fearsome warrior. "Commander, I want you to understand something very clearly. You are not here to negotiate terms of surrender. You are here to receive instructions for your complete and total surrender." "I don't understand." "Your empire is finished," Sora continued. "Your military is destroyed. Your ships are captured or scrap metal. Your leaders are now criminals wanted for mass murder." Veltar watched this exchange with growing alarm. The humans were not interested in the normal rules of warfare. They were not going to accept a simple surrender and move on to other matters. "Here are your instructions," Admiral Sora continued. "Every surviving Drakmor military vessel will be escorted to Coalition space and surrendered to our authorities. Every Drakmor officer above the rank of lieutenant will be arrested and tried for war crimes. Every weapon, every ship, every piece of military equipment will be confiscated." "That is not surrender," Kethvor protested. "That is complete destruction of our people." "Your people destroyed themselves when they chose to murder civilians," Captain Jaywon replied. "We're just cleaning up the mess." Admiral Sora walked back to her chair. "You have 1 hour to transmit these terms to your overlord. If he accepts, your surviving personnel will be treated according to Coalition law. If he refuses, we will hunt down every remaining Drakmor ship and destroy it." "You cannot do this," Kethvor said desperately. "There are rules of war, codes of honor, limits to what victors can demand from the defeated." The human officers looked at each other. Several of them seemed amused by this statement. "Commander," Admiral Sora said, "you seem to think this was a war between military forces. It wasn't. This was a police action against criminals who happened to have warships." She gestured to the data pads full of evidence. "You kept detailed records of your crimes. You documented the murder of civilians. You logged the destruction of hospital ships like they were military victories." "Warriors do not fight civilians," Captain Jaywon added. "Warriors protect innocents and fight other warriors. What you did was not warfare. It was terrorism." Kethvor looked around the room, searching for some sign of mercy or understanding. He found none. The human faces were calm and determined, like judges announcing a sentence. "The Coalition will never allow this," he said finally. "They believe in justice and mercy. They will intervene to prevent you from destroying us completely." Veltar realized that all eyes in the room had turned to him. He was the Coalition representative. His response would determine whether the humans had official support for their actions. His scales shifted through several colors as he thought. The evidence against the Drakmor was overwhelming. They had committed crimes that violated every principle the Coalition stood for, but the human solution was so complete, so final. "The Coalition believes in justice," he said slowly. "The evidence shows that your people have committed terrible crimes against civilian populations. Justice requires that these crimes be answered." Admiral Sora nodded. "Commander Kethvor, you now have 59 minutes to deliver our terms. I suggest you do not waste time." The Drakmor officer left the room, escorted by human marines. Veltar could hear his footsteps echoing down the corridor, growing fainter with each step. "Admiral," Veltar said when they were alone, "what you're proposing is the complete destruction of their civilization." "No," Sora corrected. "We're proposing the complete destruction of their ability to harm others. Their civilization can continue, but their capacity for violence ends here." "And if they refuse your terms?" Admiral Sora looked at him with those steady, calm eyes that had become so familiar. "Then we'll solve the problem differently. but we will solve it. The Drakmor will never threaten another civilian ship. That I promise you." Veltar believed her. The humans had already demonstrated that they kept their promises, no matter what the cost. An hour later, Kethvor returned with his overlord's response. The Drakmor Empire accepted the human terms completely and without condition. The age of Drakmor military dominance was over. It had ended not with a negotiated peace or a conditional surrender, but with total capitulation to an enemy they had never taken seriously. And that enemy was now looking around the galaxy, asking what other problems needed to be solved. 3 weeks after the battle, Veltar sat in his quarters aboard the Harmony's Edge, staring at his official report. His hands shook as he tried to find the right words to describe what he had witnessed. For the first time in his 40-year military career, he was afraid to submit a document to his superiors. The door chimed and Admiral Zethra entered. Her silver Vortani features showed concern as she noticed his trembling hands. "Commander, you've been working on that report for days. What's troubling you?" Veltar's scales shifted to deep purple. "Admiral, I don't know how to explain what I saw. The humans fought like no species we've ever encountered. They approach war like a mathematics problem." He showed her his preliminary notes, the casualty figures, the tactical analyses, the recordings of human officers discussing acceptable losses with the same tone others used to order lunch. "Every decision they made was calculated," he continued. "Every sacrifice served a purpose. They didn't fight with anger or hatred. They fought with cold, perfect logic." Admiral Zethra read through his notes carefully. "The results speak for themselves. The Drakmor Empire, which we've been trying to contain through diplomacy for 30 years, has been completely neutralized." "That's what scares me," Veltar admitted. "They didn't just defeat the Drakmor. They solved them, like erasing an equation from a blackboard." A communication alert interrupted their conversation. The view screen activated to show Captain Tae Min of the human fleet. "Admiral Zethra, Commander Veltar," he said with that same calm voice Veltar remembered from their first meeting. "We're preparing to leave Coalition space. I wanted to thank you for your cooperation." "The Coalition should be thanking you," Admiral Zethra replied. "You've accomplished something we couldn't do in 3 decades. "We solved a problem that needed solving," Tae Min said simply. "The Drakmor were killing civilians. Now they're not. The math is very simple." After the transmission ended, Admiral Zethra turned to Veltar. "Finish your report, Commander. Coalition Command needs to understand what we're dealing with." That night, Veltar completed his document. He wrote about human tactical efficiency and their willingness to accept casualties. He described their systematic approach to warfare and their complete destruction of Drakmor military capability. But he also wrote about the conversation he'd had with Admiral Sora just before leaving the human flagship. Sora had found him in the observation lounge, looking out at the wreckage that still floated around the third planet. She'd offered him a cup of coffee, the bitter human beverage that kept one awake. "You seem troubled, Commander," she'd said. "I watched your people die," Veltar had replied. "Hundreds of them, thousands, and none of you seemed affected." Sora had been quiet for a long moment. "We grieve later. We grieve when the job is done and our families are safe. That's what makes us human. We can carry that pain and still function. But how do you calculate which lives to sacrifice? How do you decide who dies so others can live?" "We don't decide who dies," Sora had corrected. "We decide what needs to be accomplished." Death is just one of the costs we pay to accomplish it. She'd shown him a photograph from her personal files. It was a picture of children playing in a park on Earth. Human young, laughing and running in the sunshine. Every person who died in this battle volunteered to protect those children, Sora had said. They knew the cost. They paid it willingly. That's what makes their sacrifice meaningful. The Coalition sees death in battle as a tragedy to be avoided, Veltar had said. We see death in battle as a tool to be used when necessary, Sora had replied. The tragedy would be if we let our fear of death prevent us from protecting innocent lives. Now, sitting in his quarters with his completed report, Veltar understood why that conversation had disturbed him so much. Humans didn't fight wars to prove their strength or claim territory or defend their honor. They fought wars to solve problems that couldn't be solved any other way, and they were very, very good at solving problems. The next morning, Veltar submitted his report to Coalition Command. Within hours, he received an urgent communication requesting his immediate presence at Coalition headquarters. The council chamber was full when he arrived. Representatives from all 7 Coalition species sat around the circular table reading copies of his report with expressions of shock and concern. "Commander Veltar," said Council Leader Thexan, an elderly Ethran whose feathers were white with age. "Your report describes humans as the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. Is this assessment accurate?" Veltar's scales shifted to honest green. "Yes, sir, but not for the reasons you might think." "Explain." "Other species fight with passion, or honor, or desperation. Humans fight with mathematics. They calculate exactly how many lives they're willing to lose to accomplish their objectives. Then they spend those lives like currency." The council members looked at each other nervously. Councillor Velthar, a Nexian like himself, leaned forward. "Are they a threat to the Coalition?" Veltar considered this carefully. "Only if we give them a reason to consider us a problem that needs solving." "And the Drakmor?" asked Councillor Lithra, a tall Vortani with ceremonial scars on her face. "The Drakmor no longer exist as a military force," Veltar reported. "Their surviving ships are under Coalition custody. Their officers are being tried for war crimes. Their empire has been reduced to a handful of civilian colonies with no capacity for warfare." The chamber fell silent. The Drakmor had been the most feared military power in this region of space. Every Coalition species had worried about eventual conflict with them. Now they were gone. Solved. Erased like an equation on a blackboard. "What are the humans doing now?" Council Leader Thexan asked. "According to their final communications, they're returning to Earth to report their mission successful. They consider the matter closed." "Just like that?" "Just like that. They solved the problem. Now they're moving on to other business." Councillor Velthar spoke up. "Commander, in your professional opinion, how should the Coalition interact with humanity going forward?" Veltar thought about Admiral Sora and her calm certainty. About Captain J1 and his matter-of-fact discussions of acceptable casualties. About the human Marines who advanced through enemy fire like they were walking to work. "Very carefully," he said finally, "and with great respect. Humans are not evil or cruel. They're not conquerors or tyrants. But they are problem solvers and their solutions are permanent." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If we remain peaceful partners and never give them reason to see us as a threat to innocent life, they'll be valuable allies. They'll honor treaties and respect boundaries and help maintain galactic stability. And if we cross them," Veltar's scales turned deep blue with certainty, "then we become a problem that needs solving. and humans are very good at mathematics. The council session ended with a unanimous vote to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. The coalition would offer humanity full membership and all the benefits that came with it. They would also be very, very careful never to harm human civilians. A month later, Veltar received a package from the human fleet. Inside was a small metal disc and a note from Captain J1. "This is a coin from Earth," the note read. "We flip them to make random decisions. I want you to have it because there was nothing random about what you witnessed. Every choice we made was deliberate." Veltar held the coin up to the light. On one side was the image of a human leader. On the other were words in human script. "In God we trust." He thought about Admiral Sora's explanation of human grief. They mourned their dead after the mission was complete. They carried pain, but didn't let it stop them from doing what needed to be done. He thought about the human Marines advancing through enemy fire with mechanical precision, about pilots sacrificing their lives to create tactical opportunities, about commanders discussing casualty projections like supply requirements. Most of all, he thought about the Drakmor Empire, which had terrorized this region of space for centuries. Now it was nothing but historical records and evidence files. In coalition databases, Veltar placed the coin on his desk where he could see it every day. It would remind him that somewhere in the galaxy was a species that had learned to make peace with the mathematics of violence, a species that solved problems permanently, a species that kept its promises no matter the cost. The coin caught the light from his desk lamp, and Veltar noticed something he hadn't seen before. Around the edge were tiny words in human script. He ran the text through a translation program. The words said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." Veltar's scales turned calm blue as he finally understood. Humans weren't warriors or conquerors. They were guardians. They paid terrible prices to protect innocent lives, and they did it with the cold efficiency of accountants balancing books. The galaxy was safer with them in it, but it was also more dangerous for anyone who threatened the innocent. Veltar began writing an addendum to his report. Coalition species needed to understand what they were dealing with. Humanity wasn't just another military power. They were the universe's solution to problems that couldn't be solved any other way, and their mathematics were always correct.